This is the story of how an empire created the very enemy that would destroy it, and the price was 20,000 lives. In the year 9 AD, 3 Roman legions, nearly 20,000 of the most elite soldiers in the world, marched through a forest in Germania. They never made it out. In 3 days, they were slaughtered to the last man by the very people they called barbarians. But the most shocking part wasn't the death toll. It was the man who led the massacre, someone Rome trusted completely, a man they had raised from childhood, trained, elevated to nobility, and considered their closest ally in that distant land. His name was Arminius, and this is the story of how Rome dug its own grave. To understand this story, we need to go back more than 20 years to where it all began. In 12 BC, the Roman Empire was at the height of its power under Emperor Augustus. From Spain to Syria, from Egypt to Gaul, nearly the entire civilized world was under Rome's control. Only one region remained unconquered, a vast forest east of the Rhine River that the Romans called Germania. It was home to dozens of tribes that Rome considered barbarians, people who lived in forests with no cities and no laws. Augustus decided that Germania would become the next Roman province, and he sent his adopted son, General Drusus, to conquer it. Drusus was a brilliant commander. Within a few years, he defeated numerous Germanic tribes, including the Cherusci. In 8 BC, Drusus forced the Cherusci to surrender, and following Roman tradition, he took hostages. Not farmers or common soldiers, but the children of nobility, young ones who would be brought to Rome. Among those children were 2 brothers, sons of the chieftain Segima. The older one was about 10 years old. He would later be known by his Latin name, Arminius. His younger brother was called Flavus. 2 children torn from their family, from their homeland, and taken to a world thousands of miles away. But Rome didn't take hostages to imprison or torture them. They had a far more sophisticated plan. It was called Romanization, turning barbarian children into loyal Romans, then sending them back as allies. Arminius and Flavus were taught Latin, Roman culture, Roman law, and most importantly, military tactics. They lived like Roman nobles, ate like nobles, studied like nobles, and gradually forgot their barbarian origins. This plan had worked with many other tribes. Rome believed it would work with these 2 brothers as well. Arminius was an exceptional student. He learned quickly and soon spoke Latin as fluently as any native Roman. He understood exactly how the Roman army operated, its strengths, its weaknesses, its formations, its commands. And Rome rewarded his dedication. Arminius was granted Roman citizenship, an honor many Romans didn't even have. Then he was elevated to equestrian rank, the second highest class in Roman society, just below senators. A barbarian child from the Germanic forests was now a nobleman of the most powerful empire in the world. Rome thought they had created a perfect success story, a loyal Roman from a barbarian, but they didn't know that inside this man, a flame had never been extinguished. From 1 to 6 AD, Arminius served in the Roman army, commanding a Germanic cavalry unit in Pannonia. He fought for Rome against other rebellious tribes, and was highly praised by his superiors for his abilities. His brother Flavus, meanwhile, had completely become Roman. He loved Rome, was loyal to Rome, and would fight for Rome until death. 2 brothers, both taken hostage, both Romanized, but destined to walk completely different paths. In 7 AD, Arminius was assigned to Germania, the homeland he had left nearly 20 years before. He returned as an advisor to the new governor, Publius Quinctilius Varus, one of the most powerful men in the empire. Varus was no ordinary man. He was Emperor Augustus's nephew by marriage and had governed Syria and Africa. In Judea, he crushed a rebellion by crucifying 2,000 people as a warning. Varus was not weak, but he had one fatal flaw. He looked down on the Germanic people with unbelievable contempt. The historian Velleius Paterculus, who knew both Varus and Arminius, wrote that Varus thought Germans only had limbs and voices like humans. He believed that those who couldn't be conquered by the sword could be tamed by law, a deadly mistake. Varus treated Germania as if it were an already conquered Roman province, imposing heavy taxes, Roman law, and Roman courts. The Germanic people hated this. They weren't used to laws, taxes, or being ruled by outsiders, but they were too divided to fight back. Dozens of small tribes couldn't unite against the Roman war machine, until one man stepped forward to unite them, a man who understood Rome better than anyone among them. Arminius secretly met with tribal leaders in remote forests, far from Roman eyes and ears: Cherushi, Marsi, Chatti, Bructeri, Chauci, Chicambri. At least 6 tribes, former enemies, agreed to form an alliance. They would fight under the command of one man, someone who had learned how to defeat Rome from Rome itself. But one person discovered the conspiracy: a pro-Roman Cherusci leader named Segestes. And ironically, Segestes was Arminius's father-in-law, a man who hated his son-in-law to the bone. Arminius had kidnapped Segestes' daughter Thusnelda and married her without her father's consent. Segestes never forgave him. When Segestes discovered the plot, he immediately went to Varus and warned him that Arminius was planning betrayal. Arrest him now. Varus didn't believe it. He thought it was just an old man's jealousy toward his son-in-law, nothing to worry about. Segestes warned him again. And again. He even offered to arrest all the chieftains who were meeting in secret. Varus still refused. He trusted Arminius, the Roman nobleman, the trusted advisor, over a bitter old man. That decision would cost nearly 20,000 lives and change European history forever. In the autumn of 9 AD, Varus prepared to move his troops to winter quarters on the Rhine. 3 legions bearing the numbers 17, 18, and 19, plus cavalry and auxiliary forces. Nearly 20,000 men in total, 1/10 of the entire Roman army at that time. At that moment, Arminius brought news that a small tribe in the north was rebelling and needed to be crushed immediately. And conveniently, they could take a shortcut through the Teutoburg Forest instead of the main road. It would be faster. Varus agreed, without suspicion. That shortcut was the path into a trap. Segestes warned one final time, practically begging Varus not to trust Arminius. It was useless. Varus turned away, and the Roman army began marching into the forest they would never leave. The marching column stretched 15 to 20 kilometers along a narrow path through dense woods. Behind were supply wagons, soldiers' families, servants, a cumbersome army completely unprepared for battle. The deeper they went, the narrower the path became. Dense forest on both sides, swamps ahead, and rain began to fall. Arminius asked permission to leave the column, saying he would scout ahead. Varus allowed it without suspicion. That was the last time Varus saw Arminius as an ally. The next time they met would be on the battlefield. Day 1. The first attack came completely by surprise. Germanic warriors burst from the forest like ghosts. They hurled spears, shot arrows, cut down anyone nearby, then vanished into the trees before Romans could react. Roman soldiers tried to deploy their famous battle formations that had defeated every enemy. But the path was too narrow, the forest too thick. There was no room to deploy. The perfect formation was useless. Rain made the ground slippery, bowstrings wet and unusable. Roman soldiers were fish out of water in the deep forest. As night fell, they tried to build a defensive camp, still hoping they could escape to the Rhine, about 100 miles away. But Arminius knew what they would do, and he had prepared for every possibility. Day 2. The Romans abandoned excess baggage and tried to escape westward. But every path had ambushes waiting. Arminius grew up here. He knew every trail, every swamp, every choke point in this forest. And more importantly, he knew exactly how Romans would react, because they had taught him themselves. Everything Arminius learned from Rome, he now used against them perfectly. Attacks continued throughout Day 2. Not the direct battle that Romans would win. Instead, hundreds of small attacks, harassment, attrition. The Roman army grew exhausted and began to disintegrate. The column was cut into small groups. Each group was surrounded and destroyed separately. No one could save anyone. By the second night, Romans built a smaller camp. Numbers had dropped significantly, and the Rhine was still far away. days 3 and 4. Romans made one final attempt to break out, but Arminius had herded them exactly where he wanted. Near Calcare's Hill, an area with swamp on one side, hill on the other, and the only path blocked by an earthen wall. The wall had been built beforehand. Behind it, thousands of Germanic warriors waited for their prey. This was the perfect killing zone Arminius had designed. Rome had no way out. The Roman army collapsed completely. Soldiers scattered, officers lost control, discipline crumbled. Varus looked around and understood everything was over. Nothing could be saved. Rather than be captured alive and humiliated, he chose a Roman death, falling on his own sword. Many officers followed suit. They preferred death to slavery or being sacrificed to barbarian gods. Those who remained fought to the death or were captured. No one surrendered, no one was spared. Senior officers were taken to sacred groves, where stone altars stood for the Germanic gods. There they were sacrificed, their blood spilled on forest soil as offerings of thanks for victory. Roman skulls were nailed to trees along the path, a clear warning to anyone who dared return. The 3 legion eagles, Rome's most sacred symbols, were captured and displayed as trophies. Arminius ordered Varus's head cut off and sent to Maroboduus, king of the Marcomanni, proposing an alliance. Maroboduus refused the offer and sent Varus's head to Rome. He didn't want war with the empire. 3 legions, nearly 20,000 men, gone in 3 to 4 days deep in the Germanic forest. This was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. And the terrible news was on its way to Rome. News reached Rome days after the disaster. The recipient was Emperor Augustus, now 71 years old. The historian Suetonius recorded Augustus's reaction, an image that readers cannot forget. Augustus let his beard and hair grow wild for months, a sign of mourning in Roman tradition. Sometimes he would bang his head against palace doorposts, like a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to hold on to. And he cried out, calling the name of the dead, repeating one phrase that would become the symbol of this tragedy. Quintili vare, legiones rede. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. For the rest of his life, Augustus kept this day as a day of mourning, a wound that never healed. Rome panicked. Rumors spread that the Germanic alliance would cross the Rhine, invade Gaul, march on Italy. Augustus ordered night patrols throughout Rome to prevent riots and disbanded his Germanic bodyguard. He no longer trusted any Germanic person, even those who had served loyally for years. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, was sent to reinforce the Rhine defences with relief troops. The 2 remaining legions in Germania, commanded by Varus's nephew, managed to retreat to the west bank of the Rhine. One fortress called Aliso held out for weeks. Commander Lucius Caedicius fought to the end before breaking out. But all Roman territory east of the Rhine was lost. Fortresses and cities burned to the ground. Decades of construction turned to ashes in weeks. The empire retreated behind the Rhine. 6 years later, in 15 AD, Augustus had died and Tiberius was the new emperor. Tiberius's nephew, General Germanicus, led troops back into Germania, not to conquer, but for revenge. Germanicus led his army to the Teutoburg Forest, where 3 legions had been destroyed 6 years before. The historian Tacitus recorded what they found. It remains one of the most haunting passages in Roman history. In the middle of the field lay whitened human bones, scattered or piled depending on where men fled or stood to fight. Beside them were fragments of weapons, horse bones, and human skulls nailed to tree trunks. In the nearby groves were barbaric altars where they had sacrificed Rome's senior officers. Survivors of the battle, those who had escaped or broken free from slavery, told the full story. They pointed out where generals fell, where the standards were captured, where Varus was first wounded, and where he ended his life. And Roman soldiers, standing in that field of whitened bones, began burying comrades dead for 6 years. Tacitus wrote a sentence that makes readers pause and reflect on the meaning of war and loss. No one knew whether they were burying the bones of strangers or relatives, but all treated them as family. Germanicus recovered 2 of the 3 legion eagles. The third would take another 20 years to find. The numbers 17, 18, and 19 were never used again in Roman military history. For the remaining 400+ years of the empire, no legion would carry those cursed numbers. The shame and pain were too great to repeat. Those numbers became taboo in Rome's collective memory. And more importantly, Rome, after several revenge campaigns, made a historic decision: permanently abandon all ambitions to conquer Germania. The Rhine would be the border, no one would cross it to claim land. Not for a few years. Not for a few decades. For nearly 2,000 years, the Rhine remained the border between two worlds. If Rome had conquered Germania, the Saxon and Anglo tribes would have spoken Latin instead of Germanic languages. The English language as we know it today, spoken by billions worldwide, might not exist. As for Arminius, the hero who liberated Germania, his fate was as ironic as his life. In 21 AD, Arminius was killed, not by Rome, but by his own relatives. Tacitus recorded that Arminius wanted to become king, and the freedom-loving Germanic people would not accept any ruler. The hero who liberated his nation was killed by his own nation. A tragic but unsurprising end. His brother Flavus remained loyal to Rome until his death. Two brothers who walked completely opposite paths. Two brothers, both taken hostage, both Romanized, but one became a German national hero, one became a tool of the enemy. But the greatest irony lies not with the two brothers. It lies with Rome and their perfect plan. Rome spent decades and enormous resources creating the perfect Roman from a barbarian, and they succeeded. Arminius understood Rome better than most Romans, but that's exactly why he could defeat them. This is the story of how an empire created its most dangerous enemy, and the price of arrogance in thinking anyone can be tamed.